My name is Otis Williams, 73 years old and still trying to make sense of it all. When my son Thomas died unexpectedly last year, I was drowning in grief. What I never told his wife Catherine was that Thomas had secretly put their $12 million mansion and our family company in my name. She believed everything belonged to her. The devastation in her eyes when she discovered the truth was nothing compared to what she tried to do 3 days later. Before I tell you what happened after my son passed, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and subscribe to hear more stories about family secrets that changed everything. I was born in a small town outside of Portland, Oregon, where hard work was the only currency that mattered. My father worked at the local lumber mill, and from the age of 12, I would help him on weekends, learning the value of honest labor. By 18, I had saved enough to buy my first pickup truck and started hauling construction materials for contractors. That small operation grew into Williams Construction over the next 50 years, brick by brick, contract by contract. I met Eleanor at a community college dance in 1970. She was studying to be a teacher, with bright blue eyes that crinkled when she laughed. We married 6 months later, in a simple ceremony at her parents' farm. Everyone said we were rushing, but when you know, you know. Eleanor supported me through those early years when I worked 16-hour days, often coming home with my hands bleeding from labor, but determined to build something that would last. Thomas came along in 1975, our only child after years of trying. Eleanor had suffered 3 miscarriages before him, so Thomas was our miracle. From the moment he was born, he had my determination and his mother Eleanor's resilience. As a boy, he would follow me around job sites, asking questions about everything. By 12, he could read blueprints. By 16, he was managing small renovation projects during summer breaks. We were a tight unit, the 3 of us. Eleanor taught elementary school while raising Thomas and keeping our books in the early days. When the business finally took off in the 90s, she retired from teaching but kept managing our finances. She had a head for numbers that neither Thomas nor I possessed. Our family dinner table often doubled as our business planning center, with blueprints and contracts spread between dinner plates. Eleanor passing 8 years ago from pancreatic cancer was the first crack in our foundation. The diagnosis came suddenly, and within 6 months, she was gone. Thomas and I were devastated. He was 39 then, already a key figure in the company, handling major projects while I focused on client relationships and expansion. We grieved together, finding comfort in continuing the business Eleanor had helped build. Thomas threw himself into work after his mother died. He expanded Williams Construction into real estate development, a move that tripled our revenue within 3 years. He had inherited Eleanor's innovative spirit and my stubborn persistence. By his early 40s, Thomas had transformed our local construction company into Williams Construction and Development, with projects across 5 states. It was at a charity gala for cancer research, held in Eleanor's memory, that Thomas met Catherine. She was 28 to his 42, working in public relations for a luxury hotel chain. Catherine was undeniably beautiful with long auburn hair, green eyes, and the kind of confidence that commanded attention in any room. I still remember how she approached our table, ostensibly to discuss a donation, but her eyes never left Thomas. My initial impression of Catherine was mixed. She was charming and articulate, but I noticed how her questions always circled back to our business success and properties. When Thomas mentioned our recent waterfront development project, her eyes lit up in a way they hadn't when discussing Eleanor Cancer Foundation. Still, I kept my concerns to myself. Thomas was a grown man who had been lonely since losing his mother. Their courtship was a whirlwind of exotic trips, designer clothes, and social events that suddenly filled Thomas' previously work-focused life. Within 6 months, he proposed with a diamond ring that cost more than my first house. I voiced my concerns once, suggesting they take more time to know each other, but Thomas was entranced. He told me, "Dad, at my age, when you find someone who makes you feel alive again, you don't wait." The wedding was an extravagant affair at the Blackwell Hotel, with 300 guests, many of whom Thomas barely knew. Catherine had taken control of the planning, and the costs spiraled to nearly $500,000. Eleanor would have been mortified at such excess, but I bit my tongue. The smile on Thomas' face that day seemed worth every penny. They settled into married life in a newly built mansion in Westlake Hills, the most exclusive neighborhood in our city. The $12 million home sat on 3 acres with views of the lake, boasting 7 bedrooms, an indoor pool, and a wine cellar that Catherine promptly filled with rare vintages. Their life looked perfect from the outside, but I began noticing small warning signs within months. Catherine had no interest in learning about the family business beyond its profit margins. When Thomas brought home blueprints or discussed project challenges, her eyes would glaze over, unlike Eleanor, who had always been an active partner in our company discussions. Catherine's interest peaked only when discussing the financial returns or social connections a project might bring. There were other subtle signs that concerned me. Catherine's spending was extravagant, even by wealthy standards. She redecorated their mansion entirely just 6 months after moving in, discarding perfectly good furniture. Her closet expanded to take over one of the guest rooms, filled with clothes still bearing price tags. Thomas never complained, telling me that making her happy made him happy. I also noticed how Catherine's behavior changed, depending on who was present. With Thomas' successful business associates, she was the perfect, supportive wife. With her own friends, mostly younger women married to wealthy men, she competed for status through possessions and exclusive vacations. When it was just family, she often seemed bored and checked her phone constantly. Thomas seemed oblivious to these concerns for the first 2 years of their marriage. The business was thriving, they traveled extensively, and they made an impressive couple at social functions. But gradually, I began to see a weariness in my son's eyes, a tightness in his smile, when Catherine announced another expensive purchase or home renovation. Still, he never complained to me directly, and I respected his privacy. For my part, I maintained a cordial relationship with Catherine. I joined them for Sunday dinners, attended the social events they hosted, and bought thoughtful gifts for her birthday and Christmas. Eleanor had raised me to believe that family peace was worth occasional compromise, but I never fully relaxed around Catherine, and I suspected she felt the same about me. We were polite strangers connected by Thomas, maintaining an elaborate pretense of familial warmth. Looking back, I should have recognized that the perfect image they projected was just that, an image, carefully constructed and increasingly fragile. But it would take Thomas' own confession to reveal just how fractured their marriage had become behind the mansion's gleaming facade. The day Thomas came to my house unannounced changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, unusually cold for our region. I was surprised to see his car pull into my driveway at 2 in the afternoon. Thomas rarely left the office during work hours, a habit he had inherited from me. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders I recognized from the months after Eleanor died. "Come in, son," I said, stepping aside as he entered my modest home. I had downsized after Eleanor passed, moving from our family home to a comfortable 3-bedroom ranch house closer to our company headquarters. Thomas walked straight to the kitchen table and sat heavily in the chair that had always been his growing up. I made coffee while he stared silently at his hands. Something was clearly wrong, but I knew my son well enough to give him space to find his words. When I placed a mug in front of him, he finally spoke. "Dad, I need your help, and I need your discretion," he said quietly. "Catherine can never know about this conversation." My heart sank as Thomas explained that his marriage was in serious trouble. Catherine's spending had escalated beyond even his considerable means. The previous month, she had maxed out 3 credit cards on a spontaneous shopping trip to Paris with her friends. When he had gently suggested a budget, she had thrown a crystal vase at the wall, accusing him of controlling her. "That not the worst of it, Dad," Thomas continued, his voice dropping even lower. "I think she having an affair." He explained that Catherine had been disappearing for hours without explanation. Her phone was suddenly password protected. Twice, he had called hotels where she claimed to be attending PR events, only to be told no such events were scheduled. When confronted, she accused him of spying and turned the argument around until somehow he was the one apologizing. "I worry I made a terrible mistake, Dad," he confessed, rubbing his wedding ring anxiously. "I love her, or at least I love who I thought she was. but I feel like I'm living with a stranger who only wants what I can provide. What do you need from me? I asked, my heart breaking for my son, but also relieved he was finally seeing what I had feared all along. Thomas pulled a leather portfolio from his briefcase and spread several legal documents on the table. I need to protect our family legacy, he said firmly. I want to temporarily transfer ownership of the house and majority control of the company to you. I stared at him in shock. Are you sure about this? That going to complicate things if you two work it out? Thomas smiled sadly. If we work things out, I can always transfer everything back. But if I'm right about her. He trailed off, then continued with renewed determination. Dad, I built on what you created. I won't let half of Williams' construction and development go to someone who never cared about what it stands for. The next day, we met with Marcus Goldstein, our family attorney since the 80s. Marcus was concerned but professional, as Thomas explained the situation. Together, they structured a legal arrangement that would protect the core family assets, while still leaving Thomas with significant personal wealth. The $12 million mansion and 70% of the company shares would be transferred to my name, while Thomas retained control of their joint investment accounts, vacation properties, and his personal assets. Is this even legal? I asked Marcus when Thomas stepped out to take a call. Marcus nodded. Thomas establishing a contingency plan, which is his right. He not hiding assets from a divorce court because no divorce has been filed. He transferring property to a family member, which people do for estate planning all the time. If he does file for divorce later, this transfer could be scrutinized. But it was done for business continuity reasons we can document. I wasn't entirely comfortable with the arrangement, but I understood Thomas' fears. Our company employed over 200 people. Catherine had no interest in running it, but in a divorce, she might demand her share be liquidated, potentially forcing us to sell properties or lay off workers to raise cash. When Thomas returned, I agreed to his plan, with one condition, that this arrangement be temporary. Either he would work things out with Catherine and we would transfer everything back, or he would file for divorce properly and deal with an equitable settlement. I would not be party to permanently hiding assets. For 3 months, we maintained this arrangement in strict confidence. Catherine never noticed that the property deed and company ownership documents had changed. Thomas tried to repair his marriage during this time. He suggested counseling, planned romantic trips, and made efforts to understand Catherine's needs. But according to my son, she oscillated between indifference and hostility, especially when he mentioned starting a family. The last time the 3 of us were together was at a dinner in their mansion 2 weeks before the accident. Catherine had been charming that evening, showing me their latest renovation, a home theater that had cost over $200,000. Thomas seemed cautiously optimistic, mentioning that they had actually had a pleasant weekend together for the first time in months. As I was leaving, Thomas walked me to my car and spoke quietly. I think I need to make a decision after the holidays, Dad. This isn't working, but I keep hoping it will. I hugged him tightly, something we didn't do often enough as reserved men. Whatever you decide, I'm here for you, son. Those were the last private words we ever exchanged. 12 days later, Thomas' car collided with a drunk driver on the interstate. My only child, my son, my business partner, and Eleanor's greatest gift to me was gone in an instant. And Catherine had no idea that the life she thought was legally hers was actually held in my name. The call came at 11:38 at night. I was already in bed when my phone rang, displaying Thomas' number. Expecting my son, I answered cheerfully. Instead, I heard Catherine's voice, hysterical and barely comprehensible. Otis, there's been an accident. Thomas, she sobbed. They've taken him to Memorial Hospital. It's bad. It's really bad. I drove through the night in a state of numb disbelief, running one red light and nearly hitting a guardrail. The hospital emergency entrance was blazing with lights. I sprinted through the automatic doors, identifying myself to the receptionist as Thomas Williams' father. A solemn-faced doctor took me to a private consultation room where Catherine was already seated, mascara streaking her pale face. The doctor's words hit me like physical blows. Severe trauma, internal bleeding, efforts to resuscitate, too much damage. Thomas had died 20 minutes before I arrived. Catherine collapsed against me, her body racked with sobs. Despite my reservations about her, in that moment we were united in our shock and grief. I held her as we both wept, two people connected by love for the man we had lost. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of necessary arrangements. Catherine insisted on handling the funeral details, throwing herself into planning with almost manic energy. She selected the most expensive casket, arranged for elaborate flower displays, and booked the grand cathedral downtown rather than our family church. I was too numb with grief to object. While Catherine focused on the public elements of the funeral, I retreated to deal with my private pain. I sat alone in my home office, surrounded by photos of Thomas from infancy to adulthood. There was a baseball game when he was 10, his high school graduation, the day he officially joined the company, his wedding to Catherine. Each image pierced my heart with the finality of what we had lost. The funeral was as elaborate as Catherine had planned. Over 500 people attended, many from the business community. Catherine had arranged for a string quartet, professional photographers, and custom memorial programs that resembled luxury magazine layouts. She stood at the entrance to the cathedral in an elegant black designer dress, accepting condolences with dignified grief. I delivered a eulogy that I barely remember writing. I spoke about Thomas' determination, his vision for the company, his love for his mother, and his generous spirit. What I didn't mention was our recent conversations or the legal arrangements we had made. Those secrets felt inappropriate to share while standing beside his casket. The first signs of tension between Catherine and me emerged during the reception at their mansion. As guests mingled in the grand foyer, Catherine pulled me aside, ostensibly to check on my well-being. "Otis, I know this is terrible timing," she said, her voice soft but her eyes direct. "But I need to understand what happens now with the company. Thomas handled all our financial matters." I was taken aback by the question, coming just hours after we had buried my son. "Thomas' will had been drafted years ago," I said carefully. "Marcus will walk us through everything next week. For now, let's just focus on getting through this day." Catherine nodded, squeezing my hand. "Of course. I'm just worried about practical matters. This house, our lifestyle. Thomas always handled everything." I assured her that nothing needed immediate decisions, though I was increasingly aware of the complicated situation we would soon face. Catherine clearly expected to inherit everything directly, unaware of the recent changes Thomas had made. The wake continued late into the evening. I noticed Catherine having intense private conversations with several business associates, including James Harrington, our chief financial officer. From their expressions and Catherine repeated glances in my direction, I suspected she was already inquiring about company ownership and succession plans. 3 days after the funeral, we met with Marcus Goldstein in his downtown office. Catherine arrived dressed formally in a business suit rather than morning clothes, carrying a leather portfolio similar to the one Thomas had brought to my house months earlier. Marcus began by expressing condolences before explaining the basic structure of Thomas' will. The document had been created 5 years earlier, shortly after Thomas and Catherine marriage. It left his personal assets, investment accounts, and 30% share in the company to Catherine. There was also a generous life insurance policy naming her as beneficiary. But when Marcus didn't mention the mansion or majority company ownership, Catherine's interruption was immediate and pointed. "I don't understand," she said, leaning forward. "What about our home? And Thomas controlled 70% of Williams' construction and development. Where is that in the will?" Marcus looked uncomfortable, glancing at me before responding. "The will doesn't address those specifically, Mrs. Williams. We'll need to review all property deeds and company documents." I could see the moment confusion registered on Catherine's face. "What do you mean?" she asked. "The house is in our names. The company was Thomas. Everyone knows that." Neither Marcus nor I corrected her assumption at that meeting. Marcus simply promised a full accounting of all assets within the week. As we left his office, Catherine was uncharacteristically quiet, her forehead furrowed in concentration. I drove home with a heavy heart, torn between sympathy for Catherine's impending discovery and loyalty to Thomas' wishes. My son had clearly been preparing for a separation, not his own death. Now I was left with an impossible ethical dilemma, holding legal ownership of assets that Catherine believed were rightfully hers as Thomas' widow. That evening, Catherine called me, her voice brittle with barely controlled emotion. "Otis, I've been looking through Thomas' home office. I can't find any of our property documents or company ownership papers. Did he keep those somewhere else? At your house, perhaps?" I told her truthfully that we should wait for Marcus' complete review. In reality, I was buying time, trying to decide how and when to reveal what Thomas had done. Part of me wanted to honor my son's final arrangements, while another part questioned whether his decisions, made in anticipation of divorce, should stand now that he had passed away. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Catherine, composed grief at the funeral, was rapidly giving way to something else: suspicion, and I would soon need to decide whether to confirm those suspicions or find some middle ground that honored both Thomas' wishes and Catherine's position as his widow. The change in Catherine's behavior after that initial meeting with Marcus was dramatic and revealing. Gone was the grieving widow who had leaned on me at the funeral. In her place emerged a woman laser-focused on securing what she considered her inheritance, with little mention of Thomas himself. The first sign came when my credit card company called to verify unusual activity. Catherine had used the joint corporate credit card Thomas had given her to purchase nearly $20,000 worth of clothing and jewelry in a single day. When I called to discuss this with her, she was unapologetic. "I'm just trying to cope with my grief, Otis," she said dismissively. "Shopping helps me not think about losing Thomas. Surely you don't begrudge me some comfort." I gently suggested that perhaps this wasn't the healthiest coping mechanism, but she cut me off. "Thomas never questioned my spending," she snapped. "I don't expect you to understand my relationship with your son." The meeting with Marcus 1 week after the funeral brought matters to a head. Catherine arrived with her own attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Diane Morrow who specialized in high-asset divorces, an ominous choice I couldn't help noticing. Marcus presented his findings clearly and directly. According to all legal documents, the $12 million mansion was solely in my name, not Thomas or Catherine. Likewise, 70% of Williams' construction and development was legally owned by me, with the remaining 30% split between Thomas' personal holdings now transferred to Catherine and shares held by our 3 minority partners. Catherine's face went from shocked to enraged in seconds. "This is impossible," she declared, slamming her hand on the conference table. "Thomas and I bought that house together. He built that company. This has to be a mistake." When Marcus confirmed the documentation was in order, showing property transfers dated 4 months prior, Catherine turned on me with fury. "You did this," she accused, her voice shaking. "You manipulated my husband when he was vulnerable. You stole what should have been mine." Her attorney placed a restraining hand on Catherine's arm, whispering something in her ear. Catherine composed herself with visible effort before addressing Marcus again. "When exactly were these transfers made?" she demanded. "And under what circumstances? Because this looks very suspicious. Transferring assets right before a death. The implication that Thomas' death might have been something other than a tragic accident made my blood run cold." Marcus quickly corrected her. "Mrs. Williams, these transfers were made 4 months ago, not right before Mr. Williams' passing. They appear to be standard estate planning maneuvers, which many business owners undertake." The meeting ended with Catherine demanding copies of all documentation and threatening further legal action. As we left the conference room, she hissed at me, "This isn't over, Otis. Thomas would never have done this to me. You poisoned him against me." I remained silent, unwilling to reveal my son's private concerns about his marriage in that moment. Catherine stalked away, her attorney hurrying to keep pace with her. Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine campaigned to claim what she saw as her rightful inheritance intensified. She began by bringing her parents, Harold and Vivian Parker, to my home unannounced. Harold, a retired bank manager with an intimidating manner, attempted to pressure me into simply transferring everything back to Catherine. Thomas would have wanted his wife provided for, Harold insisted, sitting stiffly on my living room sofa. This must have been some kind of tax arrangement that wasn't meant to actually disinherit Catherine. I explained as diplomatically as possible that I was still considering all options. but needed time to assess the company needs and Thomas' true intentions. This answer satisfied no one, and they left with barely concealed hostility. The next escalation came when Catherine hired Alan Delaney, a private investigator known for handling high-profile divorce cases. I learned this when several longtime employees mentioned being approached with questions about Thomas and my relationship, the company finances, and any discussions Thomas might have had about his marriage. I was in Thomas' home office, collecting some business documents he had kept there, when I made a discovery that confirmed my son's concerns had been well-founded. In the back of his desk drawer was a personal journal I had never seen before. Thomas had never been one for writing down his thoughts, preferring action to reflection, so finding this journal was surprising. The entries began shortly after their second anniversary and detailed his growing concerns about Catherine's behavior. He described discovering text messages between Catherine and a man named Michael, finding hotel receipts for days she had claimed to be visiting her sister, and catching her in numerous lies about her spending. The journal painted a picture of a marriage in serious trouble, with Thomas torn between his love for the woman he had married and his growing realization that she might only love what he could provide her. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before his death. Spoke with Dad about transferring the house and company shares. I hate doing this, but I need to protect what we've built while I figure out if this marriage can be saved. If Catherine truly loves me for me, then these assets won't matter. If she's only here for what I can give her, I need to know before we have children together. Reading his private thoughts brought fresh waves of grief, but also validated the decision to maintain the current ownership arrangement until I could determine the most appropriate path forward. Thomas had been preparing for a potential divorce, not trying to disinherit his wife in the event of his death. My contemplation was interrupted by a text from our company security director. Catherine had shown up at headquarters, demanding access to Thomas' office and financial records. When denied, she had created a scene in the lobby, accusing me of manipulating her husband and stealing her inheritance. Security had politely but firmly escorted her from the building. That evening, I discovered something even more disturbing. While reviewing Thomas' personal email accounts to ensure no business matters were left unattended, I found correspondence that confirmed Catherine had been having an affair with Michael Castillo, a real estate developer who had occasionally competed with our company for projects. The emails left no doubt about the nature of their relationship, with plans for rendezvous during business trips and intimate language that made me close the screen in disgust. I now faced an ethical crossroads: honor my son's apparent intention to divorce Catherine and protect the family business, or acknowledge that death had changed the circumstances and perhaps merited a different approach to his estate. Catherine's behavior since his death pushed me strongly toward the former option, but I still wondered what Thomas would want me to do now that he was gone. Before I could decide on a course of action, Catherine made the choice much clearer through her own actions. Catherine's discovery of the property records marked a turning point in our already strained relationship. I later learned she had hired not just one private investigator, but a team of financial forensic experts to track down every asset Thomas had ever touched. They combed through county records, business filings, and banking information accessible to Catherine as Thomas' widow. On a rainy Monday morning, the chief investigator struck gold at the county records office. The title search revealed that the mansion had been transferred from joint ownership to my name exclusively 4 months before Thomas' death. Within hours, Catherine showed up at my front door, a manila envelope clutched in her manicured hand. "You lied to my face," she screamed, not bothering with any greeting. Her normally perfect appearance was disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed but blazing with anger. "You and Thomas plotted behind my back to steal everything from me." I invited her inside, away from the potential eyes and ears of neighbors, but she refused to step past the threshold. "I have the property records right here," she continued, waving the envelope. "4 months ago, Thomas put our home in your name. Our home, Otis, the home I decorated, where I hosted dinners for his clients, where I was building our life." I tried to explain that Thomas had his reasons, that we could discuss this calmly with our attorneys present. But Catherine wasn't interested in explanations. "I gave Thomas the best years of my life," she spat. "I was the perfect wife. I supported his career. I looked the part. I did everything right. And this is how he repays me? By leaving me with nothing? Her words revealed more than she intended. Not once did she mention loving Thomas or missing him. Her concern was entirely focused on what she felt entitled to receive. "Catherine," I said firmly, "you haven't been left with nothing. You have the life insurance policy worth $3 million. You have Thomas' personal investment accounts worth several million more. You have 30% of the company." She laughed bitterly. "Crumbs, Otis. Crumbs from the table. That house is worth $12 million. The company is worth over $50 million. I deserve half of everything Thomas built, not these leftovers you think I should be grateful for." When I didn't immediately agree to transfer the property back to her, Catherine issued her first direct threat. "I'll destroy you in court," she promised, her voice suddenly cold and controlled. "I'll tell everyone how you manipulated your grieving son after Eleanor died, how you never accepted me and poisoned Thomas against me, how you took advantage of him in a vulnerable state to steal what should have been mine." "I am not my son," I replied, my own anger finally rising. "I've seen the evidence of your affair, Catherine. I've read Thomas' journal. I know exactly why he put those assets in my name, and it had nothing to do with my manipulation." The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. "That's a lie," she said, but I could see the calculation in her eyes, wondering exactly what I knew and could prove. "Even if I had some indiscretions, that doesn't justify what you two did. No court will uphold this obvious attempt to hide assets." She left with a final warning that I would be hearing from her lawyers. True to her word, the following morning a courier delivered a formal demand letter from Catherine's new attorney, Jenkins and Blackwell, a firm known for aggressive litigation. The letter demanded immediate transfer of the mansion and company shares to Catherine, claiming the prior transfers were fraudulent and done under my undue influence. Marcus reviewed the letter and assured me our position was legally sound. The transfers had been properly executed, with clear documentation of Thomas' consent. While Catherine could certainly challenge them in court, she would face an uphill battle proving any wrongdoing. What concerned me more than the legal threat was Catherine's increasingly erratic behavior. She began calling and texting at all hours, alternating between tearful pleas and vicious threats. In one message, she begged me to understand her position as a widow left with nothing. An hour later, she texted that she would ruin my reputation in the business community if I didn't give her what she deserved. I shared these communications with Marcus, who advised me to document everything but limit my responses. He was concerned that Catherine's emotional state was unpredictable and potentially dangerous. On the second day after her discovery of the property records, Catherine escalated again. She arrived at our company headquarters during a board meeting, somehow making it past the front desk. She burst into the conference room where I sat with our minority partners and executive team, reviewing quarterly projections. "This company belongs to me," she announced to the stunned room. "Thomas built it, not Otis. Thomas wanted me to have it. These men conspired to steal it from me, and I won't let them get away with it." Our security director, Frank Chambers, responded quickly but respectfully, escorting Catherine from the room while I attempted to maintain calm among our leadership team. Many had worked with Thomas for years and were visibly uncomfortable witnessing his widow emotional outburst. After she was escorted from the building, I had to address the concerned faces around the table. "As you know, Thomas did transfer majority ownership to me several months ago," I explained carefully. "This was his decision, documented legally, and part of our succession planning. Catherine is understandably emotional after her loss, and we're working to resolve these matters privately." While my explanation satisfied most, I could see skepticism on some faces. Catherine's public accusation had planted seeds of doubt that could threaten company stability if not addressed. Later that afternoon, Frank brought me security footage that showed something deeply troubling. After being escorted from the conference room, Catherine had claimed to need to use the restroom. The camera showed her, instead, attempting to access Thomas' former office, trying several keys on the locked door. When those failed, she had attempted to convince Thomas' former assistant to let her in, claiming she needed to retrieve personal items. Most concerning was the footage showing Catherine attempting to access our secure file room which contained sensitive client contracts and financial records. Only when Frank personally intervened did she finally leave the building. That evening, I changed the locks on my home and asked Frank to review our company's security protocols. Catherine's escalating behavior suggested she might take more desperate measures, and I needed to protect both my personal safety and the company interests. On the third day after Catherine's discovery, Marcus called with alarming news. Catherine had filed an emergency petition with the court, claiming I was destroying documents relevant to Thomas' estate and company ownership. The petition requested an immediate freeze on all company activities and assets pending investigation. The claims were entirely fabricated, but we would still need to appear before a judge to refute them. Marcus was confident we could easily disprove the allegations, but the legal maneuver would disrupt our operations and potentially alarm clients and partners. I spent that afternoon gathering documentation to counter Catherine's claims, working from my home office rather than company headquarters to avoid potential confrontations. Little did I know that Catherine was planning her most shocking action yet, one that would remove any remaining doubt about how to proceed with Thomas' estate. I was meeting with our project managers at a construction site 15 miles from my home when the security alert came through on my phone. The system I had installed after Eleanor's death showed movement in my home office, despite the house being locked and the alarm set. At first, I thought it might be a false alarm. The system occasionally detected large shadows from passing vehicles, but when I checked the live camera feed, my blood ran cold. Catherine was in my office, methodically going through my filing cabinets. She had somehow gained entry without triggering the front door alarm, likely using the spare key Thomas had kept for emergencies. I hadn't thought to change the security code since his death, a critical oversight I now regretted. I immediately called the police to report the break-in, then contacted Frank to meet me at my house. As I drove the 15 miles back, I continued watching the security feed on my phone at stoplights. Catherine was becoming increasingly frantic as she searched, pulling files out and scattering them across the floor when they didn't contain what she sought. When she found my home safe behind a painting, a hiding place Thomas had known about, she spent several minutes trying different combinations. The safe contained family heirlooms, some emergency cash, and most importantly, the original documents detailing Thomas' transfer of assets to me, complete with his signed letter explaining his reasons. I was still 10 minutes away when the camera showed Catherine moving to my desk, rifling through drawers until she found a letter opener. She returned to the safe and began trying to pry it open, damaging both the safe and the surrounding wall in her increasingly desperate efforts. What happened next occurred so quickly I nearly missed it while driving. Catherine knocked over the desk lamp in her frenzy, sending it crashing to the floor. The bulb shattered against a stack of papers she had thrown down, and within seconds, a small flame appeared. Instead of immediately trying to extinguish it, Catherine stared at the growing fire for several long moments. Then, to my horror, she deliberately pushed more papers toward the flame before continuing her assault on the safe. I called 911 again, upgrading the situation from break-in to active fire. By the time I turned onto my street 6 minutes later, smoke was visibly rising from the back of the house where my office was located. 2 police cruisers were already parked outside, and officers were attempting to enter while speaking to Catherine, who stood on the front lawn. I parked haphazardly and ran toward the house, identifying myself as the homeowner to the officers. Catherine's face when she saw me was a mask of defiance and fear. He destroyed the evidence, she was telling a female officer, pointing wildly at the smoke. Otis burned Thomas' papers to keep me from proving the transfers were fraudulent. The responding officers quickly sorted out that I had been 15 miles away with multiple witnesses, while Catherine had been caught on security cameras breaking in. When firefighters arrived minutes later, they contained the blaze to my office, though the water and smoke damage extended to adjacent rooms. As the situation stabilized, police took Catherine's statement, which changed multiple times during her interview. First, she claimed to have been checking on me and found the fire already started. When confronted with the security footage, she claimed I had given her permission to retrieve personal items. Finally, when shown clear evidence of her breaking in, she claimed temporary insanity due to grief. The fire chief confirmed the blaze had been started by the broken lamp, but noted the concerning spread pattern, suggesting papers had been deliberately pushed into the flame. The damage might have been far worse if the fire department hadn't responded so quickly. Catherine was arrested for breaking and entering, attempted theft, and reckless endangerment. As officers placed her in the police car, she fixed me with a venomous stare. "Thomas never loved you," she spat. "He told me you were controlling and manipulative. He only kept you around because he pitied you after Eleanor died." I didn't respond to her provocations, instead focusing on working with the fire department and police to secure my home. It wasn't until hours later, when I was allowed back inside to assess the damage, that I discovered the true extent of Catherine's actions. My office was a disaster of water, smoke, and fire damage. The filing cabinets had been emptied, their contents strewn across the sodden floor. My computer had been smashed, the monitor lying in a puddle of water. But most disturbing was what the police found in Catherine's purse and pockets during processing at the station. She had taken several documents, including the deed to the mansion and company ownership papers. More alarmingly, she had Thomas' personal stationery and several practice sheets where she had attempted to forge his signature. In her phone, police found text messages between Catherine and Michael Castillo discussing their plan to claim Thomas had intended to transfer everything back to Catherine before his death. There in black and white was evidence of a conspiracy to commit fraud, with Catherine and her lover planning to forge documents once she found the originals. The plan had apparently been formulating since shortly after Thomas' funeral, when Catherine first realized she wouldn't automatically inherit everything. When police searched Catherine's car parked outside my home, they found even more incriminating evidence. Blank company letterhead stolen from headquarters, a book on handwriting analysis, and a tablet containing detailed notes on Thomas' signature patterns. The premeditation was clear and damning. That evening, as I sat in a hotel room while restoration crews began work on my smoke-damaged home, I received a call from Detective Rivera, who had been assigned to the case. "Mr. Williams, I think you should know that we found something else in Mrs. Williams' possession," he said gravely. "A life insurance policy on your life, taken out just last week. The beneficiary is listed as Catherine Williams." The implication was clear and chilling. Catherine's desperation had potentially extended beyond fraud to something much darker. While there was no direct evidence she intended to harm me, the recently acquired life insurance policy raised serious concerns about her intentions. With this discovery, any remaining ambivalence I felt about Thomas' decision to transfer assets to me evaporated. My son had seen Catherine's true nature long before I had fully accepted it. His journal entries, her affair, the attempted fraud, and now this insurance policy painted a clear picture of someone who had married Thomas for his wealth and status, not for love. The question of what to do with the assets Thomas had entrusted to me was no longer ethically complicated. I would honor my son's wishes and protect the legacy he and Eleanor had worked so hard to build. Catherine spent 2 nights in county jail before her parents posted her bail. The district attorney charged her with breaking and entering, attempted theft, reckless endangerment related to the fire, and attempted fraud based on the forged signature practice sheets. The potential insurance fraud investigation remained ongoing, though proving intent would be difficult. I chose not to press additional charges, despite Marcus' encouragement to pursue every legal avenue. Perhaps it was weakness or misplaced compassion, but I couldn't bring myself to further pursue someone who, despite her actions, had been married to my son. I wanted this chapter closed so I could properly grieve Thomas without the constant drama Catherine brought into my life. Catherine's legal troubles effectively ended her campaign to claim the mansion and company. Her new attorneys, recognizing the weakness of her position after her criminal actions, approached Marcus with a settlement offer. In exchange for my not testifying about her attempted fraud and forgery, Catherine would relinquish all claims to the mansion and accept a significantly reduced settlement from the company. After consultation with Marcus and our company board, I agreed to the terms with several conditions. Catherine would receive a lump sum payment equivalent to 5% of the company value, but would have no ongoing ownership interest. She would keep the life insurance payout and Thomas' personal investment accounts. In exchange, she would sign a confidentiality agreement move out of state, and never contact me or anyone associated with Williams Construction and Development again. The agreement was finalized 6 months after Thomas' death. Catherine accepted the terms without meeting me face to face. Her signature on the documents, the last communication between us. I later heard she moved to Florida with Michael Castillo, apparently having maintained their relationship throughout her marriage to Thomas. With the legal matters settled, I finally had space to decide what to do with the assets Thomas had placed in my trust. The $12 million mansion stood empty, a beautiful monument to a marriage that had been built on false pretenses. After much consideration, I decided to sell it, unable to imagine living there myself, with its memories of Thomas and Catherine's superficial life together. The proceeds from the sale, along with a portion of company profits, funded the Thomas Williams Memorial Scholarship, supporting students pursuing careers in sustainable construction and ethical business practices. It felt like a fitting tribute to my son's vision for the company. The first year, we awarded scholarships to 20 deserving students, many from backgrounds similar to mine and Thomas' humble beginnings. As for the company, I stepped back into the role of CEO temporarily, working closely with our executive team to ensure stability during the transition. James Harrington, our longtime CFO and Thomas' friend, stepped up admirably to handle day-to-day operations. Over the next 2 years, we implemented a succession plan that would eventually transfer leadership to a team of executives who shared Thomas' values, while maintaining family ownership through a carefully structured trust. The process of healing from Thomas' death was slow and uneven. Some days I could focus on continuing his legacy through the company and scholarship program. Other days, grief would ambush me unexpectedly, a client mentioning Thomas' innovative approach to a project, or driving past his favorite restaurant, or simply waking up to the reality that I had outlived both my wife and my only child. I found some comfort in unexpected places. Several of Thomas' closest friends made efforts to include me in their lives, inviting me to family dinners and holiday celebrations. Our employees rallied around the company mission with renewed dedication, often sharing stories of how Thomas had impacted their careers and lives. The community of parents, who had also lost children, provided understanding that even well-meaning friends couldn't offer. 3 years after Thomas' death, I received a letter postmarked from Miami. Despite the confidentiality agreement Catherine had written to me, I considered burning it unread, but finally opened it one evening with a glass of Eleanor's favorite bourbon for courage. The letter was surprisingly reflective. Catherine wrote that she had been in therapy, working to understand her own behavior. She acknowledged the affair with Michael, which had ended badly shortly after they moved to Florida. She admitted to marrying Thomas partly for his wealth and status, though claimed to have developed genuine affection for him over time. Most surprisingly, she apologized for her actions after his death, particularly for the fire that could have destroyed family photographs and mementos. I read the letter twice, searching for manipulation or hidden agendas, but it seemed genuinely remorseful. She asked for nothing, not even forgiveness, simply stating that facing the consequences of her actions had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. I never responded to the letter, but I did take one action in its wake. I had been holding a small portion of Thomas' personal items that Catherine had left behind in her hasty departure photos from their wedding and vacations, a few gifts she had given him, things that held no financial value but might have sentimental meaning. I boxed these items and sent them to the address on her letter, with no note enclosed. It was not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps a small acknowledgement of our shared connection to Thomas. 5 years after Thomas' death, I officially retired from Williams Construction and Development, though I remained chairman emeritus of the board. The company continued to thrive under its new leadership, expanding Thomas' vision for sustainable building practices across the country. The scholarship program had grown to support 50 students annually, with our first graduates already making impacts in the industry. I moved to a comfortable home near the coast, where Eleanor and I had always talked about retiring. There, surrounded by photographs of my family in happier times, I found a measure of peace. I volunteered with a grief support group for parents who had lost adult children, finding purpose in helping others navigate the particular pain I had come to know too well. The greatest lesson I learned through this ordeal was not about trust or betrayal, though those featured prominently in the story. Rather, it was about the true nature of legacy. Thomas' most valuable inheritance wasn't the company or the mansion or any material possession. It was the values Eleanor and I had instilled in him: integrity, compassion, responsibility, and resilience. Those values guided his decision to protect what he had built when he recognized his marriage was in trouble. They shaped the company culture he had fostered, which survived and thrived after his death. They lived on in the scholarship recipients, who would never meet him but carried forward his vision for ethical business practices. In protecting Thomas' legacy from Catherine attempts to claim it for herself, I came to understand that legacy isn't primarily about money or property. It's about the impact we have on others, the values we demonstrate, and the positive change we create in the world. Thomas understood this fundamental truth, even as Catherine never grasped it. What would you do if faced with such a betrayal in your family? Have you ever had to protect someone's legacy after they were gone? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might find comfort or wisdom in our family's journey. Thank you for listening to an old man's story of loss, betrayal, and the enduring power of family values.